Hi, and welcome to the fifth Hospice Care of the Low Country webinar on advanced care planning. I'm your moderator, Debbie Lines, and I'm very honored and excited to be with you today. What we're doing is we're starting a little bit early in order to really get to know you all better. Today's topic is going to be funeral planning. You know, I remember when I first thought about funeral planning, I was intimidated by it. But what I'm learning more and more and excited for you all to know is how amazing it can be to have some control over those last days. While we're waiting for others to join us, I'd like to introduce you to Janet Porter, and she is the chairman of the Board of Hospice Care of the Low Country. Janet, come on on. And what we're going to do is we're going to start asking you some poll questions and get the answers to those questions as a way, like I said, to get to know each other and really get everybody involved in this process. So, Janet, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm glad to see you, Debbie. And you know what the audience doesn't realize is that we do a dress rehearsal for each of these. And I was so surprised at how much I learned during the dress rehearsal
I agree.
that I never thought about. And my family are planners. You know, I already have my obituary written and I'm already 60, I'm only 67. So I come from planners, but I learned so much. So I think the audience today will really get a lot out of this.
So let's go ahead and ask the first question. And it's rather a basic one, but I think it's pretty important. And the first question is, do you know whether you want to be cremated or buried? Do you know? Actually, I switched it around. Do you know whether you want to be buried or cremated? There's a yes and a no or a don't know. Please feel free to answer that. And we'll take this poll and find out what our audience thoughts are. What do you think, Janet?
You know, Debbie, it's really split kind of 50-50, which we're going to learn from Valerie in a few minutes is kind of unusual. Well, actually, I think that's pretty typical nationally, but she's going to give us other statistics here for Hilton Head. And that's one of the questions that sometimes families really have conflict with if they don't know the loved one's wishes. And it makes it so much more challenging for everyone caring for the family after the death when the family can't figure that out. So knowing everyone knowing each other's wishes is really important at end of life so that is goes smoothly for the family.
And once again, I'm Debbie Lines with Janet Porter, who's the chairperson of Hospice Care of the Low Country. We're talking about funeral planning today. What we're doing to make sure that everyone feels included and part of this webinar today is we're taking some polls and getting to know you all, our audience, while we're waiting for the webinar to actually get started. So our second poll question on funeral planning is, do you have any idea what funeral home you would want to use? And again, as Janet said, we have had a dress rehearsal, and my answer greatly changed after that. So, what do you see as our poll results, Janet?
Well, people are still answering, but you know, Debbie, this is one area where it's much more common that people don't know because so many people have relocated here and don't have generations of experience with parents and grandparents who've passed and where they've had a relationship with a funeral home. And so this is an especially relevant question for people in Hilton Head compared to other communities where people have been for generations and there's an old established funeral home that everyone uses. Um, so our polling is that the majority of people don't have any idea what funeral home they would want to use. And given how many transplants we have here, that's not really surprising.
It's really interesting to me. Again, like I said, oftentimes my answers to a lot of these poll questions shift and change after I attend one of the webinars. So I think the learning opportunities are exponential for this. I really do. Again, we want to welcome all of you to the Hospice Care of the Low Country webinar series. This is number 5 in the series. I can't believe it's already number 5. And I'm Debbie Lines, your moderator. I am sitting with right now Janet Porter, who is the chairperson of Hospice Care of the Low Country. And we are going to be talking today about funeral planning. Very excited. And before we actually get started, we're doing some poll questions. This is our third question. Again, at the bottom of your screen is a chat button and you can answer. And the question is, have you written your obituary? Again, there's a yes, no, and a don't want to option. So we'll take a moment and do that. And I think anyone who's been with us for the first two questions knows Janet's answer to this one.
Well, Debbie, I just have been dealing with a cousin of mine who's a veterinarian, so, very professional person, and who's dealing with, she's one of five children, dealing with her mother who just fell at the age of 90 and broke her hip in four places. And I've been trying to help them sort out whether she should be in hospice care and things like that. And my cousin's in Colorado, where she's in New York. It's like so many family situations right now. And I asked her, has your mother, have you written your mother's obituary? And she said, no. And she said, and my father said he can't think about at all about anything about the funeral. He can't even talk about it. And told her, I said, well, I've already written my obituary and I'm 67. She said, why have you done that? I said, well, I come from planners. So no one who's responded today has written their obituary. My husband actually asked me to, because he said, you're involved in so many things and I don't know what you want me to say. So tell me what you want me to say. I have to say, I didn't write it until COVID. COVID is what inspired me to do it.
Oh, did it really?
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
is that? I haven't written mine. I don't know why. I think it's just something that you think you'll do the next day.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I said to somebody said, why would you have done that? And I said, I want to make my passing as easy for my husband as possible.
I think that makes
And
so much
and
sense.
I don't want him to struggle with what would I want him to, what would I want said. And I said to him, you can edit it if you don't think that what I've said is true.
And I think we talked during dress rehearsal. My father-in-law probably had the sweetest. He wrote his obituary. He chose all of his songs. He knew exactly what he wanted. And I will tell you, to be honest with you, it made his passing and the experience of the funeral and the service so pleasurable and memorable. I think it was bittersweet in a lot of ways.
Well, you talk about how you said what songs you said he had picked,
Oh
because
my,
I thought that was amazing.
he did all songs from when he taught children's Bible school and Sunday school. So they were Jesus Loves Me and they were This Little Light of Mine, all songs that any of us who went to Bible school or any of the little schools when we were young would probably know. We
Yeah.
did a lot of really fun ones. It was great.
And I bet that was really memorable for the
It really
people who were there.
it was great. And we've got one more question before we get started. And I think it's going to be an interesting one. Have you shared with anyone what plans you have for your funeral? And this is a bit about what we were talking about. And I think it's exactly, what do you want for your eulogy? That's what I'm looking at right now. Where do you want it to be held? So there's a lot of questions. I think once sometimes we don't know the questions until we listen to something like this webinar. Now we have a whole new educational base to make the decisions on. So again, have you shared with others what plans you have for your funeral?
So again, for those who are on the line, all you have to do is move your function up to the your cursor up to the yes or no line, and then you get then your answer is recorded. So everybody should please vote now.
Okay, let's see what everyone has voted. What do you think? Am I going to be surprised on this one?
No one on the line has said that they shared their plans.
Good. I don't feel alone then. But I'll tell you, now that we're talking about it, I'd love to choose my own music. I
Oh,
would,
wouldn't you?
yes. And I would love to be outside. And there's a lot of things I think that when I really think about it, I would probably have an opinion on.
Well, my best friend knows. I love the song "Do You Know Where You're Going To" from Mahogany.
Yes. Do you
You
know? Yes.
exactly. You remember that song, Billy D. Williams, and Uh, so we have some feedback on our video audio for some reason.
Okay, now I don't have it here. So,
You're okay?
yep.
Okay, good. Okay, good.
And joining
Well,
us, Arlene. Are you hearing any? If I think we're good.
okay, good. Okay, good. So I think so. As I said, I've told my best friend what I want, but I hadn't told my husband till. And I was just thinking when we were asking these questions, that I need to write that stuff down for my husband. Because who would think to? That's not a religious song. Who would think to play? Do you know where you're going to? No one would. You know.
I will say that I think temperament and personality has a lot to do with if we actually write these or not. Because I will tell you, I think I could tell you right now what music my husband does want. And Janet, I think Miss Darlene shared there might be a little feedback from you. So we'll just kind of pay attention to that. Let's see what time it is. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes until we actually begin the webinar. And we're talking today about funerals. What we want. Do we want to be buried? Do we want to be cremated? I think what sounds like a topic many people avoid, and you've taught me this, Janet, is it's actually quite interesting. There can be pretty significant and memorable moments. It can be inspirational. It can be bittersweet. It can be fun. So I'm learning a lot.
We know, Debbie. We know that on previous webinars, you've said you've taken notes because you've learned so much. And I would encourage all of the people who've signed in to get some paper and pencil, because I think they're going to be wanting to take some notes today based on our previous discussion with Valerie. She's going to be full of really good information.
Exactly. She really is. All right, let's see where we are time wise. Do you want to go ahead and get started? We got a couple minutes. How are people doing signing in?
Let's wait a few more minutes. I think we've got people still joining us, and uh,
Imagine Janet and I having to chat for a few more minutes before we start. That's no problem at all.
exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the things that this topic's particularly relevant is because people are wondering what to do about funerals during COVID. And we're going to be talking to Valerie about that. And I mentioned earlier that my cousin's mother is dying, and she's concerned about what funeral arrangements they can make during COVID. So that's kind of top of mind to people too. And we'll talk about that this morning.
And I have to tell you that when my mom was very ill in hospice here in the Low Country came in, that was my first introduction to a process and how to make it much easier. And I think that's something that you all did that I didn't realize hospice did, is they helped guide me and my dad and the rest of my family into making decisions that we hadn't finished up, and they made it so you all made it so user friendly and help us put all the pieces in place. And I think what I garnered from that is I'm now more prepared. I think my dad's more prepared, brothers, sisters, and family. And again,
Yeah.
it demystified the experience.
Yes. Yes. Well, Jenny's going to talk about how when we first sign up a patient and do intake on a patient, we ask the family about funeral arrangements. Even if the expectation is that the person has months to live, we want the families to start thinking about that and getting that settled. It makes things on the day of passing so much easier. And Valerie's going to talk about the consequences if you haven't figured out, for example, what funeral home you want to go to. Other advantages of having done some prior planning.
It just makes so much sense. And I will tell you from experience, when my mom did die, it was we were grieving, and the fact that we had a plan in place made it so much more meaningful, because the family could actually sit together and we knew what to expect. So that was a wonderful gift we got.
Right.
So I think, Janet, it's almost 10 o'clock here. We've got about 30 more seconds, and I'd like to begin to welcome everyone to the Hospice Care of the Low Country 5th Advanced Care Planning webinar. We just made Janet go away. She's going to come back in a moment, so stay with us. My name is Debbie Lyons, and I'm going to be your moderator today. I'm very honored to have participated in these webinars, and I think they are priceless. And if you haven't had an opportunity to join us live, I do encourage you. They're on demand, they're on YouTube, they're on the Hospice Care of the Low Country website. Please, please, please take advantage of these. They answer many questions that we didn't even know we had, quite frankly. But today we're going to be focusing on funeral planning. And like we've said to the people who joined a bit early, oftentimes that's something that people may not want to talk about, funeral planning. But we have Valerie Mayer today, who's the lead funeral director at Island Funeral Home. And she's amazing. She is a wealth of information. She will help us navigate this process. And she's an excellent source of information. Once again, these webinars are free and they're to answer any questions that you do have. With that said, if this is your very first Zoom meeting, and it is a process, take a look at your screen. Either at the top or the bottom of the screen is a panel and it will say chat. We really want you to engage in the process, if you will. If you have a question, please don't hesitate to type it in. We will then answer it as we go along. The feedback that we've gotten is that pencil and paper is great. Take notes, ask questions, anything that you can think about, we are willing to answer. It also helps us decide for our next webinars topics that may be of interest to you. So again, at any time, please, please, please feel free to join us. Janet, this is our chairperson from Hospice Care of the Low Country, Janet Porter. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Debbie, and thank you again for doing this series for us. We so appreciate it. You're such a community servant, and this is just one of the many things that you do to volunteer across the community, and we appreciate it.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I've learned a lot. I really have. Talk to us a little bit about where we're going to be going today with Valerie.
Okay. Valerie Mayer is a lead funeral director on the island. I'm going to give her a more formal introduction in a few minutes. But before I introduce Jenny, but she's full of information. I mentioned earlier that people don't realize we do a dress rehearsal in advance to make sure everything's smooth and our audio and video are working. And we were all stunned at how much we learned from her. Even though many of us have had experience planning funerals, we learned so much, and we're going to ask really practical questions today. But we're also going to give the audience, as always, a chance. If you go to that chat button at the bottom of on the bottom of your screen or at the top of your screen, there's a toolbar, and you can chat in anything. And Darlene Schutz, who's our Director of Community Relations, is going to be answering questions, but I'm going to be able to read those and ask those of Valerie too. So as we do it today, I think it's going to stimulate questions, Debbie, and we really want to encourage people to weigh in.
It's a wonderfully interactive opportunity. And I think at this point, we want to talk a little bit about you, or I can do it. As Hospice Care of the Low Country has supported patients and families for how many years? 38 years. And Jenny Brasington has been the executive director for 10 years. Hi, Jenny. I've known you forever and ever and ever. And it's such a treat, and I feel really honored to do this. You've got a lot to share with us. So without further ado, Miss Jenny Brasington.
Thank you, Debbie. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our 5th webinar of our series. We're very pleased to be offering these to the community. Please check out our website for the recordings and some really important information regarding end of life and advanced care planning. Hospice Care of the Low Country cares for patients with terminal illness. We also take care of their families, and we're taking care of them at end of life when they are faced with several challenges. The challenges can range from pain management, distressing symptom management. Who's their power of attorney? Do they have that person? Have they chosen that person to make those wishes for them? And funeral planning. When we bring a patient onto our service, one of the questions we do ask is, do you have a funeral home picked out? If they do not, we will give them a list of the local funeral homes in our area. Many of our people are transplants from another state, so they may want a funeral service here and in their home state. So we're looking at those and trying to get those arrangements done, guide them, help them with this process. When a family comes on to our service, if there's ever any type of emergency, they're instructed to call us. When that patient passes away, they're instructed to call us, and a nurse will then go to the home and help with the family, and they will call that funeral home. So it's very important that we know who that funeral home is. And we stay with that patient, we stay with that family until that body's actually removed by the funeral home. So today we're talking with Valerie Mayer, Island Funeral Home. Valerie has been with Island Funeral Home for many, many years, and we have a great relationship with her. She's helped many of our patients, many of our families. So what Debbie and Janet have talked about is that there will be a lot of great information, and we had the dress rehearsal, and I think many of us found out things we didn't know and things that we need to get taken care of. So thank you, Valerie, for being here with us, and I am going to turn it over to Janet.
Thank you, Jenny. As we've said, the topic today is about funeral planning. Many of you may have joined us for our previous webinars. We did one on grieving last month. The month before that, we did medical planning. The month before that, we did legal planning. So we've had a whole series that we've tried to address topics that would be concerning for people at end of life and where advanced planning would be helpful. As Jenny said, we really encourage you to access these on our website. We want to make these be a resource to the community for people in many ways, not just in terms of asking for hospice care, but in terms of thinking about end of life. And what we know is that there's an etiquette about death and dying, and that etiquette is shaped by the culture we grew up in. I've been faced just this week with the fact that my cousin's mother is dying. She was a first cousin of my mother, my Aunt Bernice. And the 5 children of this 90-year-old couple are struggling with my Aunt Bernice's recent fall, which led to, breaking her hip in 5 places. And what's been surprising to me as I've tried to help my cousin Sheila think about what they could be doing now in anticipation of Aunt Bernice's passing is how they have not talked in their family at all about death and dying. They really don't know what the funeral home arrangements should be. No plots have been purchased. They haven't written the obituaries. The 90-year-old father doesn't really want to talk about the passing of his wife. And in my family, on the other hand, my parents were very outspoken about their wishes, and my mother repeatedly wrote her wishes every 5 years. She would kind of change what some arrangements that she wanted to be different in terms of what the tablecloth should be in fellowship hall, for example. So we're all a product of that culture from our families, that's ethnic, religious, etc., as to whether or not how we think about death and dying and how we think about celebrating the life of someone who's passed. And so I think this is going to come from we're coming today from a very pragmatic viewpoint, which is that you're really blessed if you know what the wishes are of the deceased, if you know in advance whether they want to be cremated or buried, if you know in advance where they would want a service or what music they would want at their service. That's a really blessing for others if you express those wishes. So I was honored to know everything my parents wanted, and to know, for example, that they both wished that that my sisters and everybody wanted me to do the eulogies, and I was actually able to write part of them in advance, and that helped me so much because I wasn't struggling with doing that, while I was really grieving their passing. So today, what we decided to do is to ask Valerie Mayer to join us, who's the lead funeral director of the Island Funeral Home. And she's been on Hilton Head many years. And many of you, in fact, on the call today may know her. And so Valerie, please join us. And Valerie and I are going to talk about kind of what we think the common questions are that you might have. Hi, Valerie, how are you?
Hi, good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us today. I think top of mind, people wonder, how do you get in the funeral home business? So tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up being a funeral director.
Okay, well, I was born and raised in Syracuse, New York, and my 3 children were born there. And then when it snowed on Mother's Day, we decided to move down to Hilton Head, and that was now 23 years ago. As a little girl, and I don't know why, but as a little girl, I was always interested in death and dying. And so I felt it was my calling to become a funeral director. I tried in college to take other courses, and it just didn't work out. So I went to the mortuary school right in my town, and loved it ever since.
And so how long have you been here now?
Been on the island in the Low Country area for 23 years, and I've been with the Island Funeral Home since 2005. So 15 years, almost 16.
Wow.
Yeah.
So many of us have that story where we woke up on Mother's Day and had snow and said, it's time to go south. So
Yes.
many of us have that story.
Yes.
And so the other question people probably have is, what exactly does a funeral director do? So talk about your job and your scope of responsibilities and how you interface with families and churches. Tell us how that all works.
Right. So the first thing we do is once we receive the first call from the family is we bring the deceased into our care. That's the first arrangements that we make. And then we set up a time to meet with the family, the deceased family, and we'll talk about what kind of services they want to have. If they want to have cremation or burial, we arrange for those services with the clergy, churches, synagogues. We help them write the obituaries if they seem to not want to or just are having a hard time with it. We place them in the newspapers. We also do all the necessary legal paperwork. So, and we take them, we take good care of them. I feel like my role as a funeral director is to take them under my wing, the family under my wing, and guide them through the whole process. And it's the worst time of their lives, most likely, the worst day, the worst time. And it's my honor to help them get them through this.
Well, these webinars are being offered by Hospice Care of the Low Country, and we like to think about the fact that those who work in hospice care, that it's really a calling, that some people are just called. And I think being a funeral director is really a calling, that you are meeting people at really, as you said, the most tragic circumstances of their lives. And Valerie, you and I haven't talked about this, but I took courses on death and dying in college.
Oh.
And my girlfriends thought I was depressed or something, but this topic and helping people die with dignity has been a passion of mine and an interest of mine since I was 18, 19 years old. So we come to these callings in different ways, don't we? Isn't it?
Yes, how about that? Yeah, and now look at you with hospice. That's wonderful.
Yeah, and just like you, I'm honored to serve and try to make a difference in the community. So one of the biggest questions that people face is this decision about burial or cremation. So talk about how people make that decision and how you help guide families.
Okay, well, choosing between cremation and burial is a personal decision. And we give the families all the options for both. And, we can talk about, if their religion plays a part of it, their places of birth, the past decisions of the family, financial and family heritage. So we can go through all of those and talk about it with the family. And, it's different for every family. So we help guide them through that process.
And you mentioned before what the statistics are nationally and what the statistics are locally about what percent of people take cremation. So talk about that.
Yeah. So nationally, cremation is over 50%. Here on Hilton Head, our funeral home is right about 90% cremation. So it's very high. It's been since the funeral home opened, it was about 80%, which was in 1981. So it's been high on Hilton Head for a long time.
And you attribute that to the more transient population, I assume?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so talk about, I think we know if people want to do burial, then they have a plot or, but talk about in cremation, what the options are that families then, how you work them through what the families options are as to what to do with the ashes.
Right. So with cremation, a lot of people don't know this. First of all, you can have everything that you want to have with cremation that you can do with a traditional burial. So you can have a visitation with the body if you'd like to. You can have a funeral service with the body if you like to, and then you can have the cremation after. So we can do all of that celebration, even though it will be a cremation. And then for the cremated remains, there's so many options. Churches have columbariums, which the urn can go right into a little spot called a niche, which is very nice. They can be buried in the ground in a cemetery. They can go to a cemetery in a columbarium, which is what I was saying earlier, is like a wall for the cremated remains to go into. A lot of people here like to scatter cremated remains either on the earth or in the water, which if you go out in the water, you're supposed to go out 3 nautical miles. That's the law. But we have amazing biodegradable urns now that the whole urn can go into the water. So the cremated remains aren't flying around in the air. So and I've been on beautiful services from boats that we've chartered for families. So that's amazing. A lot of churches and some cemeteries have what's called cremation gardens, where you can scatter the cremated remains right in a garden in the cemetery, or your own garden if you'd like, and you can get your own little monument. So there's lots of options.
And people can buy niches in a columbarium just like they can buy a funeral plot at a cemetery, right?
Exactly, yes. Mm-hmm.
That, in fact, is what my parents had done, and my sister has a niche there, and so we all know what her wishes are. So let's talk about how you work with churches and synagogues, and then I want to talk about kind of specifics about what's going on during COVID. But talk about how you work with churches and synagogues.
So we have to be well versed in what each individual's faith's beliefs are, and for afterlife care. So we talk to the families, and we listen to what they want to do, and then we'll make the arrangements with the churches or synagogues and with the clergy, and we can make all of those arrangements so the family does not have to. They tell us what they want, and then we make the arrangements, and then usually after that the family meets with the clergy.
Okay.
To arrange the
let's talk about,
service.
I was really struck by my cousin in this midst of what we're in the middle of this week.
Yeah.
About they're thinking about, well, what's going to happen to a funeral during COVID? And I explained to her that I had just recently been to a funeral at the Sea Pine Cemetery. What is it called?
Six Oaks. Six Oaks Cemetery.
I added an oak there. I just was at an outdoor service there. So I know people are doing services, but talk about how things have changed during COVID and what's available to people now.
Yeah, so things are starting to open up now about services. Back in the middle to end of March, April, May, everything was very closed up, and we weren't having services. So now at the Island Funeral Home, we can have up to 50 people for a service, and as long as they have masks on, that has been working beautifully for families. churches are now opening up. And if the church hasn't opened up there, it seemed to be having outdoor services at the church, which is just beautiful. So now also we are doing video. We have Facebook Live and a streaming service called Tribute Casting. So that families across the world can see their loved ones' services. So that's working out beautifully.
Yes, the service I just attended at Six Oaks, it was not obvious to those of us in attendance under the tents with masks on, but
Right.
evidently it was projected on Zoom or something, Tribute or whatever, to to people even in Hilton Head who didn't feel comfortable coming to a service.
Exactly. Yes.
Because I know some people who watched it from home. So that's wonderful that people are able to participate in that way. And how do you find that people can interact and support families then? How are those services different? Are they at all different?
Yeah, definitely. I just worked with a family that had a service at one of our churches, and I just felt so bad for the wife because she couldn't really hug the people that came. It's just, she did talk with a lot of them, which was wonderful, which wasn't happening a few months ago even. But it's so hard and so different for them. Yeah, it's not easy.
Yes. So Valerie, we can also take questions from the audience, and I encourage people to chat in.
Okay.
So Pat has asked, what do you know about simple cremations online, and what does a really basic cremation approximately cost?
Okay. So, yes, you can arrange for any type of services online. Even, at islandfuneralhome.com, you can arrange for services online. And just be careful that you're using a reputable funeral home, a licensed funeral home, and they have licensed funeral directors there. And for us, a non-ceremonial cremation, which is a cremation without, it's a simple cremation. What the person's asking about starts at $2,685. And then the prices can go up if they're planning to have a service. And it also depends on what the family chooses regarding urns, regarding the cremation container and things like that.
So what are we talking about when we say simple cremation online? What does that mean, simple cremation?
So that means usually without a service. It means for us to transfer the body into our care. It includes for us to do all of the necessary legal paperwork, which is filing the death certificate, first getting the information from the family, filing the death certificate, getting permission from the Beaufort County coroner to be able to do the cremation, and then to do the cremation and then talk with the family about what type of urn they want. And it can be that simple.
And when Pat says simple cremation online, that includes the pricing and everything you just mentioned includes an online service or recognition.
Correct.
Or means it does. So
yes.
Some recognition online. Okay.
Yes.
And you mentioned licensed funeral homes. How would somebody even know if a funeral home is licensed or not? I think people assume if you call yourself a funeral home, you're licensed by the state. Is that not the case?
Well, I actually listened to a podcast a few months ago that there was this woman running she called it a funeral home this was out in Colorado, and she wasn't licensed, the funeral home wasn't licensed, and she's bringing them money, and these people weren't getting their cremated remains back. So you just have to be careful.
Okay. So you would know that. Would you indicate, for example, on your website that you're licensed? How would you find out whether a funeral home was licensed?
Well, I think, I would, if possible, I would call the funeral home, make an appointment, go in and say, show me your license. I mean, if you want to,
Okay.
yeah. Or you can call the state and see if they're licensed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
State
And
licensing board.
so you mentioned the price of a simple cremation. So how does the price of a burial, um, what you might consider a simple burial, let's just say, how does that price compare? Is it much more expensive?
So it would be start at about double the price of cremation. So a non-ceremonial burial, so, a very, if you will, simple burial can start at $6,000. And then depending on the family's choices, selections, it can go up and up and up, whatever they would like. So, but it could start about $6,000.
And Valerie, is that because of the price of the plot and the casket?
The $6,000 does not include the plot. That is completely separate with the cemetery that you work out with the cemetery. And it's because of choosing a casket, and most cemeteries require what's called a vault, which is an outer burial container. So that, that can be, that raises the cost. And then going into church with the body, all of those things raise the cost.
So Sandy is asking a good question, which we were planning to ask you, which is about this notion of prepaying. And Sandy specifically asked if the arrangements are made, which means that she's prepaid, are made through Island Funeral Home or any funeral home. And
Right.
Upon death, I'm actually not living here. Is it still good? How does that work?
Yes, well, first of all, the advantage of prepaying, which we call pre-funding, is locking in at today's prices. So that is wonderful. So if I meet with a family this afternoon and they're pre-funding, it will be at today's prices. And if they die 20 years from now, it will still be at today's prices, 2020 prices, which is wonderful. That's the great thing about pre-funding. And our plans, and most funeral homes plans, the companies that they work for are transferable. So if we had somebody that pre-funded with us and they died out in California because they moved out there, it is no problem for the funeral home there to call us and say, we need Mrs. Smith's funds. And we say, okay. And then we work that out together, and it happens all the time, and it's very easy, very simple.
I think you mentioned actually when we talked earlier, Valerie, that the money is actually, that there's actually a common account that people are putting that money into. Just explain that.
Yeah, so we use an insurance company, and the individual has their own policy. So even if I'm meeting with a couple and they're both pre-funding, Mrs. Smith will have her own policy number where her money goes, and Mr. Smith will have his own policy number where his money goes. We do not keep the money here at the Island Funeral Home. It has to go into a third party.
Yeah, I think that's something people don't really realize, is that that's kind of a national account and then can be good anywhere. And
yes,
so many of our residents, when they become very old, do choose to relocate to be near their children, that they could work. Let's say they're in their 70s and they work all this out, and then in their 80s they move back to Toledo or something.
Right.
And the arrangements have already been made, and it works in Toledo just as good as it works here.
Absolutely. We'll send all of the information to the funeral homes to make it easy for the family, so they don't have to, fill out all the forms again. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Valerie, how often do you find that people have what you call pre-funded a funeral? All these arrangements. Does that happen 30% of the time, 80% of the time? How often does that happen?
I would say probably about 30% of the time is people are pre-funding. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are they? And does that make it smoother then? Because not only in that pre-funding have they prepaid, but they've also specified what they want in that pre-funding,
Exactly.
because what they
Yes.
want determines the price that they paid you in the pre-funding, right?
Yes, it makes it so much smoother, actually, even for us and especially for the family. So yes, it's a huge help and a huge relief for the family that is left. Mhm.
You know, Valerie, our first session in this series was called Having the Conversation.
Yes.
And it was we talked to somebody from the Conversation Project, which is a national effort headquartered in Boston to get people to have conversations. And it's interesting as we come upon the holidays that the Conversation Project, this sounds incredibly morbid to people, but they recommend that you talk about what you want at end of life over Thanksgiving dinner, because that's the one time when all the families together.
Yes.
So people really all hear the same thing from mom and dad, and even the kids. They hear from 19-year-old Johnny, who's riding around on a motorcycle without a helmet on, what his wishes would be, right? So Darlene's in fact putting on the website, for those of you who aren't looking at the chat, resources on the Conversation Project. And when I talk about having the conversation in advance, I talk about it being a gift you give those you love.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And that is the perfect way to describe it.
I mean, it really is a present to them. It is a gift for them to know what your wishes are at end of life. And we think about that from previous webinars. We think about that in terms of, do you want to be put on a ventilator? Do you want medical too? Where do you want your assets to go? But also in terms of the gift is the gift of knowing what you want in terms of a service, what you want in terms of, you know, who you want to do the eulogies. I mean, all of that is a gift to those you love. And I really considered, my sisters and I considered it a gift that we knew, and made everything in both of our parents' passing so much easier. So but my husband and I have not pre-planned our funerals, and now you're getting me thinking about that. So,
well, I want to say a couple things, if that's okay. Pre-planning does not mean you have to pre-fund. So you can come on into the funeral home. We'll sit down with you. We'll talk about all the options, and then we can write down everything that you want to have done, and we have you complete paperwork that we need for the death certificate and the cremation, and then we put that in a file here with your name on it. So now if you want to pre-fund, yes, that's even better, but we want you to know you don't have to pre-fund to pre-plan. And another thing is, with the insurance company that we use for pre-funding, they have a wonderful payment plan where if you don't want to pay for the whole services up front, you can, we can arrange to have a withdrawal from your bank account that goes directly into your policy every month for either 3, 5, 10, or 20 years. So you can pay for it, you know, in time.
Wow, excellent. Sandy has another question. What if she prepays and then moves away, but her wishes are actually for the ashes to be returned to the ocean off the coast of Hilton Head? Is that a problem?
No, not a problem at all. She can be cremated where she's living at the time, and then the funeral home can send the cremated remains to us, and we can, you know, make the arrangements for the family, or the family can bring his cremated remains to Hilton Head and make the arrangements for that. That's simple. Yeah.
Okay. And thank you, Sandy, for asking all those questions. Anybody else who has questions in the audience, please chime in. So anything else that's different during COVID, or that we should think about more given COVID?
Well, you know, we can do small services now, and then hopefully in the future we can make it for them more of a celebration of life. You know, maybe next spring or something. So just because we can't have something right now, if they don't want to, or their family's not going to come and, you know, get on an airplane or drive in the car, then we can do it later on. It doesn't mean a no forever.
And Valerie, do you find that families are planning that they're planning smaller services with the expectation that they'll do a celebration of life where all the grandchildren and et cetera can attend, that they're
Yes,
planning something later? Do you find that pretty common right now?
yes, very common. Mm-hmm.
Do you? Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so what other recommendations would you make for the audience where they should think about to make this smooth for their family members?
Well, the first thing I would say is to talk with your family. Tell your family at Thanksgiving, it's coming up. Tell your family your wishes, what you want for your funeral. And then come in, make an appointment, come into the funeral home, and we'll write everything down. We'll have everything written down, and then everything would go smoothly. So my thing to say would be pre-plan, pre-plan, pre-plan.
And let's talk about that pre-plan, because one of the things that I know we talked about earlier, Valerie, is what happens. For example, when, as Jenny mentioned, when we have patients in hospice care, we ask them right away when we do intake, what arrangements do you make? But still, we have families who don't have arrangements, and the family member passes away at home. When the
Right.
family can't make that decision and they call 911 and say, my brother's passed away. What happens when they can't figure out a funeral home? How does that work?
Well, if they're with hospice, the hospice, they'll call, and their loved one dies, the family will call the hospice nurse, and then the hospice nurse will go to the home and pronounce the person, pronounce the death. If they are not with hospice, then yes, the family should call 911. And then the emergency people will call the coroner's office, and the coroner's office will call the physician to see if the physician has seen this person. So those are two different ways that it's going to happen. If they have not chosen a funeral home, we want to be their funeral home of knowledge and their funeral home of choice. So they can call the Island Funeral Home or tell the hospice nurse, call the Island Funeral Home, and then we will transfer their loved one into our care. And then we'll call them the next day, and we'll talk on the phone a little bit about what they want to do, if they have questions. And if they end up not using us, there'll be no charge from us. We'll, we understand, but we want to help them through at the first part of this and have the deceased in our care while they're making that decision.
But the families that can't make a decision on a funeral home, the body then is transported to the coroner's office. Is that correct?
Yeah, that does not happen too often, but I guess that would be the case. Yeah. Most families have made that decision. And I think that's a big thanks to hospice, because they have the families calling the funeral homes. Like they call us and they say, my mom is a patient with hospice care of the Low Country. She is starting the dying process, and they have told me to call you. Okay. So that is wonderful when that happens.
So Donna has asked, she wants to know about transportation of remains, including the holding the body or the ashes. So explain the policies about that. Like you mentioned that families can transport ashes from, Toledo, Ohio down to Columbus, Hilton Head to be, yep, for the ashes to be strewn in the, Atlantic if they want. But talk about what the regulations are about transportation of bodies. What happens, for example, if the family wants the body taken back to Toledo, Ohio?
So then we prepare the deceased here at the funeral home, and then we find out which funeral home the family would want to use up in Ohio, and we contact them and we'll make the flight arrangements. And within just a few days, we can send their loved one up to Ohio.
Okay.
By air.
So Donna, let us know on chat if if we've answered all your questions about what you wanted to know about holding the body or the ashes, because I wanted to be complete there. So Valerie, I think we love to make sure that people on our webinars are familiar with resources. And so are there any resources that you recommend for people? And I know Darlene will chat these in, and this is available to all panelists and will be available later on our website. But any resources that you recommend to people?
Yes, the first one is our own website, islandfuneralhome.com. There is a tab there that is, it's called Plan Ahead. And you can click on that and you can put in your name and telephone number, and we can, that will call you then and talk, and we can set up an appointment for you to come in. There's also a Get Informed tab that is helpful, that has commonly asked questions. Then the National Funeral Directors Association website is wonderful. That is nfda.org. And on the left side of their front page, there's a section that you click on that says For Families. And they have some really very informative drop-down tabs like Honoring a Life, Starting the Conversation, Plan in Advance tab, a Grief tab. So those two are really helpful.
Thank you so much. You know, we're committed at Hospice Care of the Lowcountry to help and be there for families at end of life. And this is just one of a whole series of webinars that we've been holding to make sure that we're answering common questions that people might have and giving, we really wanted to give practical advice to people.
Yes.
And so we really appreciate you joining us today. I think your common sense approach to this and willingness to talk about kind of any topic is really helpful. I've certainly learned a lot, and I know that when we did our dress rehearsal, we all thought we'd learned a lot, and we're recording information. And ultimately, what we all want, Valerie, and I know what you want to help families do, is to really respect the wishes of those who we love in their passing and try to honor their life at end of life. And it feels so good. And I know this has happened. My husband's Irish, and we had his dad's service, and then we did what the Irish do, which was we went to a pub and told jokes for hours and drank, even though it was the middle of the day. You know, so whatever the tradition is that makes you feel good about honoring the loved one, we want to do everything we can to make sure you've thought that through so that you can do that and not have any regrets later on.
That's absolutely right.
Helped make that happen today.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed my time with all of you.
So now what I'm going to do is turn it back over to Debbie. Debbie, did you take notes and learn a lot?
Listen, absolutely. I learned after the first webinar that pen and paper traveled with me. And yes, I took copious notes. I learned so much. And I'm really grateful just to have the opportunity to feel like I have a one-on-one, especially with someone like Valerie. Yeah, I took amazing notes. I learned a lot. So
well, thank you again, Debbie, for emceeing for us. We appreciate it.
And Janet, it is always a pleasure. And I just want to say to all of you that Hospice Care of the Lowcountry really tries hard to follow the gold standard services for everyone. They are an amazing organization. They are an amazing organization. I think what we want to do is we welcome your feedback. We want to remind everyone that these webinars are available on demand. And we would encourage people who are here today to actually maybe share or forward some of these webinars to folks that may find the information really valuable. Once again, we want to learn more so that when we decide to have other webinars, we have some topics that are of interest to everyone. Janet, Valerie, Darlene, Jenny, it's been a really powerful group. I feel very honored to be together. We hope you all enjoyed today. Please have a wonderful week. Bye-bye now.